What's the difference between a conspiracy theory and fact is like 3 months right now. So,
Exactly.
although I like being called a conspiracy theorist, especially now that we're like 300-0 for the past few years.
Right.
However, I get a little skeptical when I hear that particular version. Was it set up? You get this sort of James Bond villain-esque bunch of guys in a room plotting world domination. I try to look at it a little more practically. I think it's just incentives.
Joining me today is a freedom maximalist, Bitcoin advocate, and host of the What is Money show, Robert Breedlove. Welcome to the Rubin Report.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
We did a reverse version of this at the ARC conference when we both were doing our show from a very, very small trailer on a quiet day, and we got to talk finance and politics on your program. So I'm glad that we get to kind of reverse this. I feel like I should have mentioned you're also Florida man now too.
I am a Florida man as of a couple months ago.
Yeah. How do you feel about the
Key Biscayne
freedom
Island
and
is good. I don't think I'm going to be leaving a red state ever again. Post-pandemic, I grew up in a red state. I'm from Tennessee. Lived in several blue states the past few years. We were just talking about Los Angeles. I was also in Hawaii. And I think red U.S. states are probably the best place in the world to be at this point in history. So I think I'm here to stay as well.
Yeah. Is that partly because of the finance part of your life, but also just because of the safety part of your life, the sunshine part of your life? You're also in a particularly kind of pristine area over there.
Yeah, it's a very nice area. But even nice areas in Los Angeles. Like I was in Santa Monica when I was living there, and that place went batshit crazy, And so my revelation was, like you, I love Los Angeles. Like good weather, great food. I was single, so great place to date. However, once COVID happened, I witnessed people fall into hypnosis of some kind. And my realization was that I can't be in a compliant culture. I just had this sudden, I also had become a father recently. My daughter was about a year and a half when COVID started. So I guess I had this parental urge to try and get to a place that was more culturally sane in my perspective. So now that I've made the move, I don't think I'll ever change again.
And why didn't you go back to Tennessee instead of coming?
Well, I did actually. I was there for a year. Spent a year in Nashville, but then I've been living endless summer for the past 13 years. So one winter in Tennessee, and that was enough.
And then you're here. Yeah. All right. So so we're going to dive into a whole bunch about finances, which I don't do too much of on the show. So I'm glad to be doing that. And Bitcoin, obviously, and a couple other things. But for people that just don't know who you are, could you give me like the kind of 101 bio first, and then we'll go from there?
Sure. So my background's accounting and finance. I've been basically a career CFO prior to starting the podcast. I also ran my own hedge fund. We started out as a multi-strategy crypto asset fund, and then I was sort of learning about Bitcoin during that process and becoming much more narrowly focused on Bitcoin. So I'm what many people would call today a Bitcoin maximalist. I don't touch or use or interact with any other cryptocurrencies or crypto assets. However, I describe myself as a freedom maximalist because I think even Bitcoin, as amazing as it is just a tool, which means that it is a means to an end. And that ultimate end for me is human freedom. So that's what I try to promote on the podcast. I started the podcast November 2020, really as just kind of a hobby project. And my first guest, Michael Saylor, we had several episodes together and it just blew up and immediately became kind of a full-time thing. So I'm very grateful that I get to nerd out for a living and educate people about the nature of life, liberty, and property and things like that.
So we'll obviously do a whole bunch on Bitcoin, but let's start with like some basic finance stuff. Because I think one of the things that has put us in this weird position we're in kind of culturally in this country is that very few people understand the basics of economics. Do you find that to be a fairly true statement?
Yeah, I like to say we're living in the economic dark ages, actually. I think we're coming out of the economic dark ages. Keynesian economics, which is what's taught in universities worldwide, is a pseudoscience at best and propaganda at worst. Basically says that government needs to monopolize and print currency to control the economy. All right, they talk about levers and buttons and policy tools. And I think it's the wrong metaphor, right? The economy is a complex adaptive system. It's not a machine. You can't press buttons and pull levers and create outcomes, right? It's complex, not complicated. Someone like Taleb might say, you have the danger of confusing the cat for the washing machine, right? If the washing machine breaks, you can go in and change a few pipes and you can get a predictable outcome on how to fix it. Can't do that with your cat, right? Much more complex. So if one human psychology, one human's patterns of action are difficult to predict, imagine how difficult it is to predict 8 billion humans interacting in a complex marketplace. There is no institution that can manage that, right? It's as ridiculous as a meteorologist trying to manage the weather. So I think we have a pseudoscientific economic paradigm, and I think Bitcoin is spurring an interest in Austrian economics, which is much more humble, I would say, in its approach to how we understand economic science. And that is hopefully awakening us from this economic dark ages and putting us back in touch with economic reality.
Do you sense that partly it was all set up to build a giant system that kind of didn't work and kept people confused about things so that a certain set of people would be in power or something to that?
Yeah, it's one of those things. I guess guys like us in this corner of the internet probably get, well, they call us conspiracy theorists, right? Oftentimes, although conspiracy theorists are
just means
like,
you're a little ahead of the curve.
Yeah. What's the difference between a conspiracy theory and fact is like 3 months right now. So
exactly.
Although I like being called a conspiracy theorist, especially now that we're like 300-0 for the past few years.
Right.
However, I get a little skeptical when I hear that particular version. Was it set up? You get this sort of James Bond villain-esque bunch of guys in a room plotting world domination. I try to look at it a little more practically. I think it's just incentives ultimately. I had a guy on the show named Ed Dowd. He used this term meta fraud, where he's saying even the pandemic, like although there are top-down elements of it, there's also just broken incentives that sort of create pathological outcomes in a way. So although I think, you could read a book like The Creature from Jekyll Island about the inception of the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States, there was clearly a small group of people that were very interested in getting a central bank implemented into the United States. However, so there's that top-down element. However, I don't think even they could foresee all of the problems that it would create over the subsequent 100 plus years, which we're dealing with still today. So I think, and this is pretty popular in Bitcoiner circles. Bitcoiners don't agree on a lot. We're tend to be very adversarial thinking. However, I think the one point of common agreement is that incentives really matter. And when you start to interfere with the individual pursuit of self-interest in a way that's limited by other people's person and property, you get really negative outcomes. And so for me, this goes all the way back to the 1215 Magna Carta. Life, liberty, property. This is the exclusive scope of government. Anything government does beyond that, which to be specific, obviously protect life, right? Don't interfere with people's freedom of movement and don't steal people's shit. That's basically all you want government to do. Anything else that it does, it's overstepping its mandate as far as I'm concerned.
But can I have some of the rich people's money to do crazy social projects? Wouldn't that be nice?
No,
you can't have
that would not be good. No, I mean, I'm very radically anarcho-capitalist. So I think there should be no violation of private property whatsoever. That means no taxation, no inflation, and no regulation by fiat. Consensual regulation's okay if we all agree, we have homeowners associations, right? You agree to opt into a certain rule set, but you can also opt out, right? The ability to opt in and opt out makes it consensual. So long as consent is part of every human engagement, then we're okay.
So what would you say to the argument that libertarians are obviously confronted with all the time of just that it's just a utopian way of thinking? Like I'm completely on board all of that, and in my heart of hearts, in like the perfect system I can create in my mind, it's a libertarian utopia. But not everyone wants to play by those rules.
Sure, it is. A valid criticism could be that it is idealistic, especially in the context of our current world. However, I think saying ideals or idealistic as a negative thing doesn't make sense to me because we have to have ideals to work towards, right? Again, I'd go back to the Magna Carta. It was life, liberty, inviolable private property. That's an ideal. We've never had a world where no one steals from anyone ever. No one coerces anyone ever. That's never going to happen. But it's an ideal that we inscribed in a constitutional document, right? As something to strive for and something to try and enshrine with our legal codes and our moral codes. So yeah, maybe libertarianism or anarcho-capitalism is ideal. Maybe it's unattainable, but what's that old saying? Like aim for the stars and you'll land on the moon kind of thing. So
Right.
I think, and we have trended that direction. So it doesn't make sense to me to try and pull back the aim. I would, something Peterson says, right? From Carl Jung, set your moral aim as high as you can, and the rest of your life will sort of organize itself around that aim.
If you're looking for an unfiltered lens into the world of tomorrow, check out our tech playlist. And if you want to watch full interviews on a variety of topics, watch our full episode playlist, all right over here. And to get notified of all future videos, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell.